Welcome to Madang Podcast. Today's special guest is Sharon McMahon, who is America's favorite government teacher. Today, she shares her new book, The Small and the Mighty, which is a heartfelt, inspiring portrait of 12 ordinary Americans whose courage formed the character of our country. She shares about Alexander Hamilton, enslavement, World War II, education, Quakers, and so much more. Please stay tuned. Homebrewed Christianity's Theology Beer Camp tickets are available. It will be held October 17 to 19 in Denver with fabulous speakers such as Diana Butler Bass, Brian McLaren, Ilya Delio, and John DeTolomeo, and more. Please go to www.theologybeercamp.com to register. Use discount code Return of Madang for $50 off registration. Please register today. We live in a time of crisis upon crisis, and yet the church is silent. The need, or better put, the demand for a new trajectory of faith is clear. Where do we begin? Is there a starting point for considering faith beyond Christendom? Please join Homebrewed Christianity's new online class, Rise of Bonhoeffer, Faith, Resistance, and Theology in Action. This class is hosted by Doctors Tripp Fuller and Jeffrey Pugh, with a list of top experts on Bonhoeffer. This important class is donation-based, including free. So please go to www.homebrewedchristianity.com to register today.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast@gmail.com. This is Madang, an outdoor living room for guests to share their experiences and their work. I invite you to come in and stay for a while.
Welcome to Madang Podcast. Today's special guest is Sharon McMahon, who is a longtime high school government and law teacher who is now best known as America's government teacher. On her Instagram account, Sharon says so. In a time when flashy headlines and false information often take the spotlight, millions of people rely on McMahon for nonpartisan, fact-based information. McMahon is the host of the award-winning podcast, Here's Where It Gets Interesting, where each week she provides entertaining yet factual accounts of America's most fascinating moments and people. She is the founder of The Preamble, a newsletter that gives you the history of the context about stories that matter in all that she does. McMahon encourages others to be world-changing humans. And today, she is here on the Madang Podcast to discuss her first and fabulous book, The Small and Mighty. Thank you so much, Sharon, for coming on Madang Podcast.
It's truly a pleasure. It's an honor to speak with you.
Oh, thank you so much. We were on something with Lisa Sharon Harper over a year ago, and that was so much fun. So it's so great to have you on my podcast. I hope to meet you in person one day.
Yes, I would love that. It'll happen. It'll happen at some point.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah.
And I know recently you got some big award because I saw you in some fancy place getting a huge award. So tell us about this award.
Oh, I've gotten a few awards, and it's always an honor that anybody else notices what you're doing, right? Like when somebody says, "Hey, great job at that thing, at that public service," a public service award or a fundraising award, some philanthropy or communication award. It's always an honor when you realize that, like, oh, somebody noticed. I'm sure you're familiar with.
No, I'm not that familiar.
You've gotten awards. You've gotten awards.
They're not the great awards.
It's always nice to just feel like, wow, like what I do makes a difference, and what you do makes a huge difference. Even if you're not getting the marquee awards, what you do matters. It really does.
Oh, thank you. Because what you do is so important and you have all this huge following and through your following, I know you raise a ton of awareness and tons of money.
Mm.
So thank you for all that you do.
It's a pleasure. It is a pleasure to do work that matters. It's a pleasure to
Oh,
do good work.
yeah, thank you. And thank you for taking the time because I know your book is doing fabulous, The Small
Mm,
and Mighty. And I know you're doing a ton of interviews and so busy, busy. So
mm,
before we get into the book, what led you to begin writing? Because this is your first book. So what led you? Because you're doing so many other activities and not everybody gets to then sit down and write. So what led you to write?
mm. It's a great question. Like, why write this book and why write it now?
Yeah.
And, I talk about in the book how so often it is the auroras of history, the people whose stories are beautiful and multicolored and so eye-catching. But when the sun comes up, these like large dominant suns of the men with the biggest armies and the billionaires with the rocket ships, their dominant suns
Yeah.
eclipse
Uh-huh.
the auroras of history.
Uh-huh.
Meaning, like when the sun comes up, it's not that the colors go away, it's that we just can't see them anymore because we don't
Yeah.
know to look for them. So
Uh-huh.
these are the stories that I feel like have been waiting to be told all of this time and have either been intentionally excluded from the narrative or have been mistakenly excluded from the narrative. And it's these stories that I find the most compelling. We've heard enough about George Washington, Grace, right? Like, fine, we get it. He was the first president. He has a monument, and but we don't need another George Washington book. I want to hear about some people, real people who did real stuff.
That's very true. That is so true. And I must say, I just love your writing style. It is just so, it's really compelling. You tie in a little bit of humor and it's so beautiful. I've never read a book like yours.
Thank you.
So
That means so much. Thank you so much.
yeah, it's just so beautifully written. And so you have these 12 people that you cover. How did you come up with them? Because I'm
Mm.
sure there were others and you were probably deciding, should I include them or not? So how did you end up deciding on these 12?
Mm, that's a great question. And there's so many I wanted to include. You're absolutely right. Oh, maybe I'll have to write another book because
You
there's
have to write
more.
another book.
There's more
I think you
stories.
need a whole series.
This is part 18 of The Small and the Mighty, book number 24. Um, some of this is, these were just stories that I was like, dang, these people did really, really incredible things. And I've never even heard about them. And these are people, I've been studying history since I was a teenager.
Mhm.
So, and I went on to become a teacher and I've taught these things for years. And so many of these stories are like, why have I never heard of this person? And I uncovered them through, lots of research, years of research. It took me several years to write this book. And they're just names that I noted or jotted down, or maybe it's a name of somebody that was famous in their lifetime, but they were famous for something else. And
Uh,
people don't know the story behind the story. They don't
uh-huh.
know what happened to them when they were a child, or they don't know what adversity they had to overcome to become the person that you know. So they were just people that I felt like had compelling stories that were really ready to be told and stories that I feel like people need right now.
Yeah.
We
Uh-huh.
feel like in this time in our history and
Yeah.
looming on the 2024 election,
Yeah.
which I think no matter who you're voting for, I think a lot of people feel really a lot of anxiety about.
Mhm.
They feel
Yeah.
anxiety about this fall and they feel like what I do doesn't matter. That if they feel a sense of cynicism about their own ability to impact the world, and these are examples of people who often came from nothing. They
Uh-huh.
overcame incredible odds or incredible adversity in their lives, and they just used what they had, where they were, with the resources available to them, and did something incredible with it. And I think that's a message that we all kind of need right now.
It is. That's why your book is so timely. Like it just worked out. It's coming, during the election year. And the stories, like you are a great storyteller
Thank you.
because you make these people just come alive. As I was reading, I had to like Google and research more. But I wanted to really learn more because you could
Yeah,
only do so much for each
right.
person. But
Yeah.
I just thought you are this fantastic storyteller because if you didn't do it that way, I think it would have been a very, very boring book. I think I would have
Mm,
just read maybe chapter one and put
mhm,
it aside, but it's so captivating and you
mm,
just want to learn more and more. I just kept
mm.
like I have to read more, like way more now after this book.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad you loved it. And my
Love-
hope was what when people closed the book that they would feel like they had met some new
Yes,
people that they
yes.
were so happy to know. Like, I'm so glad I know about them now.
Yeah.
Yes, like they've just become like old friends. That's how I
Yeah.
feel about them. Yeah.
Exactly. I just thought, wow. And you just made them come alive as if they're just living now. They're not
Mm,
historical people,
mm,
but they are present. And it was just you just write so well. I was like,
mm.
wow, I want to be a writer like you.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you so much. Hey, you have written a bunch of books, Grace.
I know, but
You,
they're not like your type of books. I always say there's authors and then there's people like me who write books, but you're like an author. So
oh,
it was just incredible to read it.
thank you.
And yeah, I'm just hoping that people will continue to get it and read it. This is such fabulous, especially for someone like me, because I didn't grow up in the US. I grew up in
Right.
Canada, so I didn't know any of these people and I don't know that much about American history.
Mm-hmm.
So you weaved it all within the context of that time,
Mm,
which it was so good for me. It was like a history lesson and an inspirational book
mm,
and a religious book. It was just
hmm
everything kind of tied together.
Did you notice my mentions of the Methodist Church, Grace? There's a couple of mentions of the Methodist Church in there.
Yes. And you have a bunch of stuff with Quakers. And if you
Yes.
didn't know, yeah, I teach at a Quaker seminary.
Yes, I did know that. Yes, I did.
Yeah, so I teach at a Quaker seminary. So I thought, wow, that was a lot. So before we get into all that Quaker, you began the introduction with Alexander Hamilton. And I actually don't know much about Alexander Hamilton because I didn't grow up here. And I'm one of the few that watched Hamilton. And I was so confused watching.
What is happening right now?
I didn't know
Why
what
is
was
there
going.
rapping? Why is there rapping in
Yeah.
1756?
I
Yes.
didn't quite get it. And I was one of those few that came out thinking, like, what's all the hype about Alexander
hmm
Hamilton?
hmm hmm
So
Yeah.
tell us why you began with Alexander Hamilton in the
Mm,
introduction.
mm. Well, Hamilton, of course, has a tremendous impact on the founding of the United States. Of course, he does. Like, yes, there's a whole Broadway show about him, whether you loved it or not. He's become part of the, like
Yeah.
cultural landscape, in part because of this show. His face is on our money. And he becomes the first Secretary of the Treasury. He is in charge, he is somebody who created the entire United States banking system, how the United States eventually someday becomes sort of this world financial powerhouse. Some of it has to do with Alexander Hamilton. So his death, he's shot by the vice president of the United States. Okay, so that is, first of all, weird. Imagine Kamala Harris or imagine Mike Pence rowing themselves in a boat across a river and then shooting a political rival and getting away with it. Aaron Burr was never prosecuted for shooting Alexander Hamilton. He's put on
Wow.
trial for committing treason against the United States later. He was not convicted. But not forever, not ever for shooting Alexander Hamilton. The idea that like the vice president shoots Alexander Hamilton, that's just crazy. So, I start with his death because there is somebody in the room with him who never makes it into the Broadway show, who is one of Alexander Hamilton's closest friends, who sits there after Hamilton is shot and killed, who watches the doctor perform an autopsy on Alexander Hamilton. Imagine your friend dying and you're just like, yeah, well, he died. Let's do the autopsy. And you
Yeah.
just sit there and watch it. That's another thing that's crazy, right? Like we're just going to watch it right here in this house where he died. That seems crazy. So he's such a good friend to Alexander Hamilton that he eulogizes him at his funeral. He sits next to Hamilton's sons at the cathedral where the service is. So, but this person is not a person that even if you were born in the United States, even if you're a history buff, you would never pick him out of a lineup. And yet his contribution to the United States is perhaps as much or more than Alexander Hamilton. And he's such a great example of how the stories we know are not always the best stories.
Yeah.
They're just the stories that get written down and passed on. What if there's a whole bunch of good stories that we just don't know yet? So hopefully some of those are in this book.
Yeah, well, I just love that introduction, just like grabbed me into the book. And as you go over these characters, was there anyone that really you resonated with or that pulled you? Because there was one for me, and mine
Mm,
was the story of Clara Brown. I
mm,
just I've never heard, like many of these people I've never heard of, but
yeah.
Clara Brown really touched me because to me, this woman out of enslavement is so desperate to find her daughter who is lost
Yes.
and goes across the country
Mhm.
and, seeking her and, out of this difficulty of getting across and then having this washing machine or the washing, I forget how you called it.
She had a laundry
Yeah,
business.
laundry.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
to make all that money and then losing it all, but finding the daughter just before. I think that was such a captivating story for me.
Mm,
So if you want
mm.
to share a bit more about Clara,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I would love to. Clara is born into enslavement or somewhere around the year 1800. And
Mm.
eventually, she undergoes, like everybody who is enslaved, has some very, very significant, horrible things that happen in her life in addition to being enslaved. And she loses all of her children and her husband and, vows that someday I'm going to do what it takes to find them again. And one of the aspects of her journey is she is eventually granted her freedom, and she decides that she is going to go somewhere where she hears that there are people heading, like she hears that there are people heading west, and she tags along, convinces a wagon master to let her join his wagon train west, and in exchange, she will cook for all of the people who are heading west. It's dozens of people. And Clara does not get a seat in one of the wagons. She walks over like between 600 and 700 miles. And this is a woman in her 60s. Okay. Imagine walking 700 miles in your 60s to your new home. And then she does some incredible things to make an impact in her community, to make an impact in what will become the state of Colorado. But one of the things that really struck me about Clara is the attitude that she faces her life with. And there's a professor in Colorado who has studied Clara extensively that there was an interview with. And one of the things that really struck me is that he said he teaches his students there are some people who go to church or go to the temple or go to a mosque, and then there are some people who live out their faith. And
Ah,
Clara was the latter. She
mm,
was somebody who actually did what it took, lived out what it meant to have a faith. And Clara's faith is, an important part of her life. You can't just tell Clara's story and not talk about why she is the way she is. So I
yeah,
just love that even all of these years later, that we can look at Clara as a member of our community of ancestors, so to speak, somebody that we can point to and say, this is a fantastic example of what it means to live your faith if you are a person of faith, and not just to not just to talk the talk, but what it means to walk the walk.
yeah. and you just write it so beautifully. It's so compelling, and you
Mm.
put it all in this historical context, which I just love because I don't know a lot of the American history. And you brought in the gold rush and then Levi jeans. If you want to say a
Yes.
little bit of, because I didn't, I owned, I still have Levi
Yeah.
jeans. So
Yeah.
if you can share, because I think that's an important part of this history,
Yeah.
many people don't know why it came about, why the genes are there, and who Levi was. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, Levi's it's an iconic denim brand, right? But the person who founds the brand does not invent jeans. Jeans have been around for a long time. He's not the inventor of jeans. He's just the inventor of a specific style of pants that involved rivets. When he realized that workers were using his clothing and they were ripping holes in the seams. The pockets were coming off. He decides, well, what can we do to reinforce these seams? He invents this concept of using rivets on the jeans, which we still use today. It makes them more durable. Well, that's he happens to be sort of in the right place at the right time during the gold rush, and all of these miners and people who are heading west really want to use his, they wear his stuff. And there's a story in there too about how they recently found the oldest pair of Levi's in existence and they sell for all this money. But one of the things that I think is interesting to note is that the inventor of Levi's, Levi Strauss, uh, intentionally included on the tag in the jeans that they were the only denim made of entirely white labor. They
Mhm.
don't use any immigrants. This was a time of great contention when Asian immigrants were coming to California, and a lot of white settlers felt like these people are taking our jobs. And also, competition for Black labor. The Civil War had recently ended, and a lot of formerly enslaved people were looking for work. There was competition for paid work now. And so he wants these white settlers to know, hey, I only use white labor. And this tag is in the oldest pair of Levi's that were ever found, recently found in an abandoned mine shaft. But even Levi Strauss, cannot accurately say that they were not made by white labor. How did he get the cotton? Right? Where did that come from? Where did the knowledge of how to dye indigo come from? It comes from in the enslaved labor. So there's a whole, my goal is to sort of weave all of these pieces of history together so you are not just left with the story of one person, but you're left understanding the cultural context in which they lived and what it was like to be in the United States at that time. So I'm glad you picked up on my Levi Strauss story
Oh,
because
I thought
I
that was so important.
thank you. Just a little side
Especially,
note, but I think it's important. Yeah.
well, I think your book is for all ages. And I think
Mm,
the young people will be very interested in that because I
mm.
think Levi's is a very popular,
It is still is.
yeah,
Yes.
it's still very popular,
Yeah.
and it'd be good for them to know all
Yeah.
that backstory. So
Totally.
that's why you bring these characters to life because you did all this historical research and you inserted as much as you needed to tell the story, and it was just so beautifully told. And
Mm,
you even mentioned Dred Scott in the story with Clara Brown, who's important. So I just appreciated Clara Brown really a lot because
mm,
it's just very inspirational for me being a
mm.
mother. I can't imagine, she's just one woman's story of so many where so many women lost their
So
family, their
many.
children. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yes. And you're right. She's one person of
yeah,
millions
yeah,
who lost their children to
yeah.
enslavement. And I
Mhm.
think sometimes Americans or Westerners have this idealized view of enslavement that people got to live with their spouses. No,
Yeah.
very often they did not.
Uh-huh.
That people got to keep their children and they would grow up into this happy family. They most often did not. And if you can picture what it's like to lose for somebody to come to your house and take your 9-year-old away from you. And that was the usual occurrence. That was not an unusual occurrence. That was the norm for enslaved families. It really lends, I think, gravity to our understanding of what it meant to live under this system.
Yeah, it's so horrible.
Mm,
So yeah, thank you for sharing that story. And you got so many more. The
mm.
other interesting one was with the pigeon share. The hello
I love
girls.
the pigeon. I love.
I never even knew about this. And when you're writing about, I thought, no, this is like an old movie. I remember seeing little pigeons in movies. I didn't know
Yeah.
it was reality. So,
Yes.
and that one part when like it was that battle and Cher gets shot.
Yeah.
Wow, the way you wrote it, it was like so fascinating. So tell us a little bit
Oh,
about the Hello Girls and the pigeons and Cher. I thought
thank
that was
you.
very, very fascinating.
I love Cher, and I had big arguments with my editors about whether Cher should stay in the book. My
Oh,
editors were like, I don't think we need it. And I'm like, we do need it. The people need Cher. And they were like, okay,
I
fine.
Googled Cher because
Yeah.
anyway, I'll let you finish.
Yeah. You
To
can
look
you
up
can
Cher.
find pictures.
Yeah.
It's out there. Oh yeah. So, okay, World War One is a very just an interesting time period to me. We hear so much about World War Two here
Yeah.
in the United States and Canada, and World War Two is more recent and more vivid in our minds because there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of books written about World War Two and movies, and so it's obviously an important time period. But what we don't know that much about is World War One.
Yes.
Why was that such a pivotal time in history? And it really was. But one of the things that I found interesting was that this was during the time when women were really fighting for suffrage. This was the run up to the passage of the 19th Amendment, where women were literally picketing outside the White House asking Woodrow Wilson, like, how long are we going to have to wait? What's the holdup? And eventually, when the United States finally agrees, like we gotta get into this war, Woodrow Wilson held out for as long as he could, and he finally was not able to hold out anymore. One of our contributions, early contributions to World War One, was our telecom industry and American Telephone and Telegraph, which later becomes AT&T, was this running lines all over the country and suddenly being able to be connected by telephone was this kind of magical thing. Frankly, it is kind of still magical. If I pick
It
up my
is.
phone and I call you, Grace, first that message goes to space. Okay. First it goes to space, then it goes to your phone. That's weird to think about, isn't it? Like it goes
Yeah.
to space first. Well, at the time it went through a bunch of cables, back when people had landlines. And the United States was uniquely positioned in the world because of AT&T to help provide connectivity in France and in other regions of Europe during World War One. Well, we didn't just want to send over a bunch of telephones and be like, best of luck. Somebody needed to operate these telephones. This was during a time where you'd pick up the phone and you'd say, hello, please connect me to blah, blah, blah. And there was a woman on the other end of the line connecting you literally by moving things around in picking up
I
a
don't know how they did that.
connector, yes, and pushing it into another one, number please. And hello, they'd connect you to where you needed to go. Well, this group of women becomes known as the Hello Girls, and they're just incredibly efficient at connecting calls. They're incredibly efficient at keeping things private because a lot of what they're connecting is top secret information. They're over and over denied the benefits of government. They're denied the benefits that they were promised by the government. But also during World War One, this was a story that I just found so interesting. The United States decides that it is going to begin using pigeons as part of our communication system during World War One, not just phones. They did use phones, but also pigeons. And initially, all of the higher ups during World War II or during World War One were like, no, we're not doing pigeons, you guys. How are we getting pigeons to Europe? Who's in charge of the pigeons? It's too many complicated things to think about. Well, eventually they decide, you know what? we're going in on the pigeons. And we form the United States Pigeoneering Service. Like, who has heard of this? The United States Pigeoneering Service sounds like something out of Harry Potter. You know what I mean? Like, that's not real, but it is. It is real. And one of the most famous pigeons in all of World War II or all of World War I was a pigeon named Cher Ami. And they assumed at the time that Cher Ami was a girl. And later, after Cher passed away, because Cher is not still alive, they discovered that Cher, in fact, was a boy. But they didn't know that at the time. Well, Cher is one of the pigeons who ends up saving the lives of hundreds of United States service members through a story that that I detail in the book. But it's like this kind
Good.
of crazy moment where you're like, if this was a movie, we'd be like, come on, that's too much. It's a pigeon that saves the men, but it really did happen. And that's just like that story amuses me so much. Cher
It
really, really
amused me.
amuses me. Yes, I'm glad I was right to include it, Grace.
Oh, you needed to include it because you made the comparison of how Cher was treated versus
Yes,
Hello Girls. Hello, is it
yes.
Hello Girls or
Hello,
Hello?
girls.
Yeah,
It's the
Girls.
Hello Girls.
Yeah,
Yes.
I thought, yeah, no, you needed that story of the pigeon of Cher because that
Yes.
comparison is unacceptable.
Yes. The pigeon gets better treatment than the human women. How is that right?
Mhm.
And the pigeon deserved good treatment. Of course, the pigeon was, did heroic things. But it's so silly to think about the women have to the women wait for decades to get what they deserve. Meanwhile, Cher goes on this luxury tour of the United States. It's not fair.
Yeah,
Unfair.
and the women, they had to pay for their uniform,
Yes.
which is unheard of for the men. Men didn't have to pay for it.
No.
And you did the present day calculation, I think it was 7,000 or something very
Yes.
enormous.
Yes.
And then,
Thousands of dollars in
yeah, and
modern
they
day
didn't
money.
get all the pension or
Right.
whatever was due to the men. So
That's
to
right.
compare and include share me was important. It was
Thank you.
very amusing, and you were so descriptive in that last battle where they needed Cher to fly away and then get shot. Like
Yes.
it felt like a movie scene, but you did a great job. So
Thank
I'm
you.
hoping many people will go and get your book to read that part.
Thank you. I'm so glad you loved it because I really fought for to
Oh,
include
tell
share.
your editors it was necessary.
Okay, good. I win that battle.
Yeah. There are so many other interesting people, but I must get to William Penn because
Mm,
I live in Pennsylvania,
mhm,
and because I grew up in Canada, I didn't even know what Pennsylvania was and how it came about, the name. And you gave a great history, and you tied it in with him being a Quaker. So
mhm,
please share with us because I find that fascinating, especially with the Quakers. And because I teach at a Quaker seminary,
mhm.
they're not all Quakers, but we have enough Quakers. And I just thought, wow, I need this for my class.
Yes. See, the Quakers are they're a group that I find personally very, very interesting in US history. They have a very unique role in US history. So there were other Quaker stories that I wanted to include even. And
Wow.
maybe in my
So this is
future
for your
books I
next
will.
book.
Yes, yes. Quakers are endlessly interesting to me. Well, of course, Quakerism was not accepted in Europe during its foundation, right? And neither were other groups, other religious minority groups like the Amish or the Mennonites, other groups in that similar sort of vein. And the Quakers continually get persecuted in England and in other places in Europe. They refuse to conform with the requirements that are, that they're supposed to, abide by. They're supposed to take off the hat and they're supposed to swear the allegiances and all of these things that are antithetical to their belief system. So people keep getting thrown in jail because they won't, swear an allegiance to the king. And eventually, the William Penn just goes to the British royalty and is like, how about we leave? What about that? How about we leave? And they're like, that sounds like the best option for everyone. So they sell William Penn an enormous amount of land in the United States, enormous amount of land. We're not talking about like a
Unbelievable.
farm size. No, we're talking about thousands of miles of land that they sell William Penn. Well, what is this one man going to do with all of this land? Right? He's needs other people to move there. So he begins he's never even been there. He's never been there and he assumes that it's woods. And he begins to call it Sylvania, which is like Latin for woods or something along
Yeah.
those lines. And eventually, the British royalty starts referring to it as Pennsylvania because it belongs to William Penn and it's the woods that belong to him. And he produces these like pamphlets trying to convince other religious minority groups to move to the new, it's not the United States yet, to move to what will become the colonies. And initially, some of the other religious minority groups, like the Quakers, were like, well, what are we going to do there?
Yeah.
There, what is even there? Does anybody want us there? How do we know we're not going to be persecuted when we get there? And he sells them on this idea that they are going to be free to practice their religion in the Americas. And one of the things, William Penn is not perfect. He enslaves people. There's definitely things in his past that you would definitely raise an eyebrow at today. But one of the things that you can point to that I think is admirable is that he could have made Pennsylvania a Quaker colony. He could have said, this is the place where the Quakers will live. And if you want to live here, you have to be Quaker. Quakers were persecuted in other colonies in America, by the way. The idea that like all of America was all freedom of religion. No, it sure was not. Do not try to move to Massachusetts Bay as a Quaker. That could get you killed. That was not the case early in the United States' colonial history. The colonies had their specific religions. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, they were the Puritans. The Catholics lived in Maryland, etc. So he could have made Pennsylvania a Quaker colony and chose not to. He wanted it to be a place where people of any religious background could live and practice and worship as they saw fit. And I think that's a testament to him, despite his other choices that I wouldn't agree with. It's a testament to him that he had the forethought to say, I'm not going to impose my religious preferences on the people who come here. This place is going to be, allow you to be free to practice your religion as you see fit. And that is one reason Pennsylvania became a haven for Quakers and for people for groups like the Amish, is William Penn's vision of everyone can be free to practice their religion here.
Yeah, I just found it so fascinating. There's
Mm.
a lot of William Penn Highway. There's a lot of William Penn
Mhm.
stuff all around
Oh, yes. Very
Pennsylvania. So
proud of that William Penn connection. They are. Yes, they are.
yeah, and then the
Mhm.
Quakers, there's a lot of Quaker, well, some of the universities, the colleges
Yeah.
are founded by Quakers here in
Hmm.
Pennsylvania, and there's some Quaker retreat center or Penn
Yep.
Hill, yeah, place in
Hmm.
Pennsylvania. So to know all this history that you put in your book was so fascinating for me
Mm.
to read.
Mm.
And you do put a lot of Quaker practices, inner light, all that in the book. So I thought, okay,
Mhm.
I have to use some of this for my classes too. So I was like, thank you, Sharon. This is all good material.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Please use it. Please use
Yes,
it. Yes.
yes, yes, yes. And I think there was a lot of theme in your book about hope and education. And, you included Anna Thomas Jeans. I don't know if that's
Mhm.
how you pronounce it.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So if you could say a bit about education, especially for the enslaved, because in our minds today, because now everybody studies together, young people may not understand that Black kids, enslaved kids weren't able to study together with the white
Hmm.
kids.
Hmm.
So if you can share a little bit, because your education is a silver bullet, and, through education, people gain independence and a way of securing a brighter future. So that was in a lot of the theme. So if you
Mm.
can say a little bit about that.
Mm. Yeah, I would love to. So, yes, if somebody's, is not really well versed on US history, they may not realize that, of course, if you were an enslaved person, it was illegal to teach you to read. It was illegal in many places. Somebody who taught taught an enslaved person to read could be prosecuted or harmed physically. So this idea that education is liberation is something that was a very important theme throughout the middle part of the 19th century in the United States. The fight of the Black community to become educated was a very important part of civil rights. Well, and early civil rights, even before we're talking about like the 1950s, 60s civil rights era, I'm talking about like after World War, or I'm sorry, after the Civil War, during when some of the early civil rights laws were passed. So the struggle to become educated is one that the enslaved desperately wanted for their children. They knew that it was all important. It was highly important that they have the opportunity to become educated. And there was a lot of opposition to that idea because even after the Civil War ended, it wasn't like all of the former enslavers were like, well, you know what? We lost that one fair and square. Best of luck to the rest of y'all. Like there was no love lost between these groups. And the former enslavers really disliked the idea that they needed to now pay wages to people who used to work for free. That really rubbed people the wrong way, and it's how we got Jim Crow laws and how we developed a system of legal segregation in the United States, legal segregation that the Nazis carefully studied and used our segregation laws and our race laws as foundational to how they wanted to treat Jews in Europe during the 1930s. So our segregation laws that made it so that Black and white children could not attend schools together. It was illegal for them to attend schools together. Also, then made it so that states would not have to provide much of an education, if any, for Black students, even if those Black students were free, even if they were legally entitled to an education. States did not do much to provide an education for them. And you can see this in the book too, where, the number of school buildings available to Black students is very different. The amount of state spending on Black education is very, very different. Well, many people around the country noticed these inequalities. One of them was a woman named Anna Jeanes, who was a Quaker woman. Anna is such an enigma because she really she strongly believed in this idea of God will reward you if you do your giving in secret, right? That the right hand should not know what the left is doing. That don't put your names on the side of buildings and like make a big fanfare and have a ribbon cutting. That the reward, Anna believed, came from doing good in secret and not being boastful about it. So because of that, Anna intentionally left her name off of everything that she was involved in, or tried to get people to leave her name off of it. But she, through a series of very unique circumstances, comes into a vast personal fortune at the end of her life when she's an old woman. And she could have gone on a big, European cruise and bought herself a bunch of furs and a bunch of ostrich plume hats and gotten a bunch of fancy furniture and had a bunch of dinner parties and like lived the good life in her old age. And she decides, I'm not doing any of that. What I'm going to do is give it all away. And how she chooses to give it away is a way that benefits the Black community in ways that are just the effects of Anna's choice are still impacting the United States today.
That is just incredible.
Mm.
These, 12 people that have impacted that many of us aren't aware of, that you bring to life in your book, The Small and
Mm.
Mighty. It's just incredible because for me, I love history. And when I was in high school, I was like, oh, I want to be a high school teacher. I want to be a high school teacher. And it's interesting that so many of my Madang guests are like church historians, and
Mm,
they're all like New York Times bestselling authors. And I'm
mm,
like, us theologians, hardly any of us are New York Times bestselling authors, but
mm,
all these church historians are. But anyway, your book is just filled with history and love and lost and hope. And it is
mm.
such a fabulous book. I hope everyone
Thank you.
goes and gets your book, Small and Mighty. You know, we can't cover all of the people that you covered, but is
Mm,
there one that you just want to say a little bit before we wrap up
mm.
that really impacted you as you were kind of doing your research and your writing?
Mm. One of the only other people that I will mention today, and there's so many good stories in the book, but one
Yeah.
person that I really, really love is a woman named Septima Clark, who is sort of the grandmother of the civil rights movement. Septima Clark teaches Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks becomes who she is. And one of the things, she encounters a variety of very, very, very challenging life circumstances. And I'll let the listener read about those. But at the end of her life, she has had every right to be bitter, to be angry, to be cynical. And somebody asks her something to the effect of, what have you learned as you have, gone through this your long life? What have you learned? And she says, I have learned that I can work with my enemies because you never know when they might have a change of heart at any moment. And I just thought, like, oh my goodness, if that is not a message that we need today, I
Yeah.
can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. In fact, how can your enemies ever have a change of heart if they are never around people who influence them for the good?
Uh-huh.
Right? If
Yeah.
enemies are only hanging around with other bad guys, and I'm using enemy loosely here, they're just people who
Yeah.
opposed
Uh-huh.
Septima's desire to educate and opposed her desire for civil rights for everybody. Um, but her perspective was not forget all of you. Y'all are a bunch of idiots. We're not friends anymore. So often that is what people are saying today. I can't be friends with you if we don't agree.
Uh-huh.
You might have ideas that are terrible, but she says, I can work with my enemies because they might have a change of heart at any moment. And that is just a message that I think we need to let seep into our bones a little bit. Like we need to be influencing each other for the good and not just cutting people out of our lives that disagree with us or who have not yet arrived at the correct conclusion about things like civil rights or how can they ever get better or improve
Yeah.
if we just say, forget you, you're worthless to me, you're done.
Yeah.
So if Septima can do it, so can the rest of us.
Yeah, that those are words of inspiration, especially during this election cycle, because we know families break up and they don't
Hmm.
talk, Thanksgiving, and friends become enemies. So those are great words to kind of leave us behind. And
Mm,
your book, every person is so important. So I hope the listeners will all go out and get The Small and Mighty. It's
mm,
so good by Sharon McMahon.
mhm,
And you go and listen to your podcast and follow you on your Instagram. Sharon
mm.
says so. It's a great Instagram because you do a lot of live stuff on there. Stuff I don't even know how to do. So I follow you, but I just can't keep up with all the stuff that you're
I
doing there.
know. It's a lot of things, Grace. It's a lot of
Yeah.
things. Yes.
So thank you so
Yes.
much
Thank
for
you.
spending time with me on Madang Podcast, and best of luck. It is selling so well. I'm sure many, many awards will be coming from this book. So
Mm,
thank you for your gift of
mm,
writing this book for this particularly this time in 2024, where we desperately need to read these people and their lives and the impact that they have made, small as they were, but they were mighty. So thank you so
mm.
much.
Thank you. It's what a pleasure to talk to you, Grace. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Mm.
Homebrewed Christianity's Theology Beer Camp tickets are available. It will be held October 17 to 19 in Denver with fabulous speakers such as Diana Butler Bass, Brian McLaren, Ilia Delio, and John DiTolomeo, and more. Please go to www.theologybeercamp.com to register. Use discount code Return of Madang for $50 off registration. Please register today. We live in a time of crisis upon crisis, and yet the church is silent. The need, or better put, the demand for a new trajectory of faith is clear. Where do we begin? Is there a starting point for considering faith beyond Christendom? Please join Homebrewed Christianity's new online class, Rise of Bonhoeffer, Faith, Resistance, and Theology in Action. This class is hosted by Drs. Tripp Fuller and Jeffrey Pugh, with a list of top experts on Bonhoeffer. This important class is donation-based, including free. So please go to www.homebrewedchristianity.com to register today.
For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com.